So I'd like to begin by, in our usual way, we chant the dedication of offerings, and then we chant the three refuges and 5 precepts. So if you can just make sure you're muted. To the Blessed One, the Lord who fully attained perfect enlightenment, to the teaching which he expounded so well, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, to these, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we render with offerings our rightful homage. It is well for us that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, still had compassion for later generations. May these simple offerings be accepted for our long-lasting benefit and for the happiness it gives us. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and Blessed One, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. The teaching so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi, Dhammam saranam gacchāmi, Sangham saranam gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchāmi. Panatipata Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature. Adinadana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given. Kame sumi chachara veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Musavada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from lying. Sura meriya majja pamadatana Veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness. Imani pancha sikkhapadani silena sugatim yanti silena bhoga sampada silena dibuting yanti tasma silang visuddhaye. These are the 5 precepts. Virtue is a source of happiness. Virtue is the source of true wealth. virtue is the source of peacefulness. Therefore, let virtue be purified. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So if you're new to the group, and then you've just experienced our traditional way of beginning the day, the evening, and it's a very common way for lay events to begin by taking the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts. It's a developmental practice, so we're not taking them as absolutes, as something to believe in or something to attain, but something to work with and develop our practice around. The 3 refuges are inspirational. They inspire us. So that's why we begin our meditation practice, taking the 3 refuges, the reflection of the Buddha's enlightenment, his teaching, and those that are practicing, those are the community who are dedicated to practice. And when we establish ourselves in an upright posture, we're taking the posture of the Buddha. Very often you'll see the Buddha sitting seated. He's sitting upright. This is the posture that he assumed, as far as we know. It's the posture that he assumed when he sat under the Bodhi tree at his enlightenment. This is what he said, that he was seated under the Bodhi tree. So we can assume this was his sitting posture that we're assuming here now. It's not that we're trying to attain anything, but it's an inspiration, isn't it? It's good to be inspired. And it's good to be inspired by the teachings. We have been received the Dhamma that's being handed down to us over 2,600 years. The Dhamma that the Buddha realized. That's quite inspiring. And that there are those who have followed that teaching over so long, that community that we're part of. And these are inspirational ideas. And the five precepts are a foundation of morality, so that for meditation this is very helpful to establish ourselves in morality. Means to lay aside what's unwholesome, just to let it go. That doesn't mean that we won't think thoughts that are not, we may have unwholesome thoughts, but our intention is to lay aside, let go. So the five precepts are a foundation for our meditation practice. They help us overcome the five hindrances which obstruct the mind, make it difficult to calm down. So that's why we take the five precepts. The reminder, not just why, because of course we can use them in daily life, but before we meditate, it's a reminder to let go of the unwholesome. But these are not balls that we have to juggle and make life complicated, but simply, in fact, to simplify, just to incline towards the enlightenment, to incline towards the teaching, to incline towards the practice, to incline towards the wholesome. That's very simple, isn't it? So in our meditation practice, we're not trying to make it complicated. Far from it, the opposite. Trying to simplify. So one way to simplify is to have the right intention, the intention to incline towards the wholesome, to incline towards letting go. To incline towards calming down. To incline towards seeing clearly, waking up. one of the cornerstones, or the center, right in the center of the Buddhist teaching, is mindfulness. That's here and now. That means we can notice now. There's nothing we need to do to become mindful, just simply notice. It's happening now. Mindfulness is available all the time. The present moment's here, and the experience of it is available to us all the time to notice. So it's very interesting to coming to that present moment awareness, to notice how that is. How does that feel? Just being awake and aware. One of the ways that we can do this is to notice the body as a way of calming the mind, to bring it into the body. Notice the physical world. So I start my meditation by bringing awareness into the physical posture, the sensations, the feeling in the body. And if there are areas of tension, to relax. Deliberately bring attention to different parts of the body and deliberately unclench the muscles where they're tense. This is not a way of making the mind busy, but rather we just take an object, the present moment awareness of whatever sensation presents itself to us. So we can deliberately focus on the top of the head and work down to the soles of the feet, or we can just notice that's what's most prominent, what presents itself, wherever it is. Feeling in the neck, the tension around the eyes, tightness in the jaw, just noticing. If we haven't got that, if we haven't done this much before, then it's good to do it methodically. But if you've done this noticing of the sensations before, you may simply just tune in to where the sensations are most prominent. I find it also helpful to straighten the posture. When I notice in tune, when I tune into the body, I can also notice the posture and straightening the back, bringing back the shoulders, relaxing the body. You notice how when you're not trying to do this, or how relaxing it is. But if you're trying to do it, trying to do something, it's not relaxing, it's tension. You get tension. If you try to relax, you get tension. It's just let the body go, let it go. You can choose any one object. You might choose to pay attention to the posture. You might choose to focus your attention on a particular part of the body where there's maybe tension in that area. You might choose to focus your attention there, because it's quite prominent. It's quite useful when you've got pain, for example, in the foot, to give attention to that, because it can be quite prominent. Or to notice the breath. Breath's a common object for meditation practice. Inhalation, exhalation. It can be good to focus. Mindfulness isn't really about focusing. It can be supported by focusing. But mindfulness is really opening to the experience. So we're not failing in some way if the mind's busy and it presents itself with the objects. The busyness of the mind is simply the experience we're having. To notice that. It can be helpful to come out of the busy mind and back to the breath, but it doesn't matter if the mind gets busy again. Simply notice the busy mind. But we're not indulging in a dream, pursuit of our dreams, imagining our future and creating a past. That's not the purpose of meditation, but to notice that's creating a story about the future or about the past. That's a mental creation, to know what it is. When we understand what it is, we can let it go. There's no reason to hold on. But it's helpful to know what it is. What's the emotional experience around the story that's being created? What's that about? How does that feel? Knowing what it is. Not adding the story to create it over and over again, but simply paying attention to the experience. Knowing what it is. Letting it go with wisdom, not out of aversion. If you have a busy mind, we're not trying to defeat it. But when we know what it is, we can let it go. Return to the breath. Return to the body. Noticing and knowing work together. So how can knowing happen? How can we know things? We know them in whatever way we can, in the simplest possible way. So we experience, say, a busy mind, and there's a certain theme, and a restlessness there. So we simply know restlessness. A busy mind is just restless, rushing here and there. That's the experience that we're experiencing. So we're knowing it in its simplest way, nothing complicated. We're not trying to analyze and intellectualize. That's not the kind of knowing, but simply knowing at the simplest level, at the simplest level of truth that we can know. So it's the restless mind, that's like this. The sleepy mind is like this. It's nothing complicated, it's the opposite of complicated. But there's still knowing there, a sense of knowing. I know what that is. That's the sleepy mind. We're not trying to analyze why we feel this way, but simply to notice how it is. We're not judging to say we should or shouldn't feel this way, but simply being with the way it is. And then we can let these states of mind pass in their own time. We're not judging them or not trying to interfere, but they'll run their course quite naturally. And we'll see a truth in that. Realize the truth. That when we just let things be, they'll cease in their own time. And we come to the end of a meditation. It's good to remember that whatever little letting go that we did, whatever small step we took, was a step towards enlightenment, that inclination, that intention that I mentioned at the beginning. Is simply through letting go little by little. So how does that work? The Buddha's teaching the Four Noble Truths, that suffering or dukkha, stress or unsatisfactoriness, that sense of it's not the way it should be, the world isn't fair, it shouldn't be like this. A sense of it's not perfect. If it were perfect, it wouldn't be this way. And that feeling is called dukkha, that sense is dukkha. But that's the first noble truth. That's something that we need to open up to admit it's like this, because it's quite hard to do that. So it can be quite compulsive, or we can have a habit of saying everything's fine. You know, it's when somebody says to you, how are you? You say, I'm fine. You know, it's like being embarrassment to have to admit that we're not. But the Buddha's pointing to the first noble truth. He's saying, I like to think of it this way personally, that it's something that we need to admit. Because we would like to pretend that everything's all right. And it can take a little time, maybe even a few years, to admit actually that things aren't. Meditation is often the trigger, because when we meditate, we realize how bad things really are. You know, the mind, we didn't realize how bad it was. The mind's all over the place. You know, that's the first impression that we can have when we meditate. Oh my, didn't realize how bad it was. And that's can be a way of a kind of step towards admitting that things are not quite as they should be. And that sense of things are not as they should be is something that is optional. So the second noble truth is really saying that we create this unsatisfactoriness out of our resistance to the way things are. So if we that sense of it shouldn't be like this is actually coming from our resistance to the way it is. Right? If it, in a sense of it, if it shouldn't be like this way, it wouldn't be this way. You know, it is the way it is. So our resistance comes out of our craving. We want things to be different. We want things to be a certain way, and they're not that way. So it's a sense of this sense of unsatisfactoriness, you could say, is optional. We don't have to feel like that. If we could just accept things as they are, then we wouldn't create suffering out of them. So that's an interesting way to reflect. I'm offering this as a reflection, not telling you how it is, but this is my a way of seeing the Four Noble Truths. So the first one is that things are unsatisfactory, and then The second one is, oh, but we make them that way. There was nothing intrinsically unsatisfactory about, let's say, the body. The body is just the way it is, isn't it? We can say it shouldn't feel pain, but it's just the nature of the body to feel pain. And if you get born, then you're going to get pain. It comes with, it's part of the baggage that we come with. So our resistance to the natural experience of pain in the body is how we create suffering out of it. That's, that, not saying that pain isn't a kind of suffering, but the sort of suffering we're really talking about is our resistance to that. Dukkha's, the optional part of dukkha is the resistance that we have. You could say that we chose to be born. If you look at it that way, then the suffering of the body was, we chose that when we chose birth. But as we're inheriting that body now, we're all here now, then we can't not choose to be born. We can't unchoose that, can we? We can't say, I didn't want to be born, I wish I wasn't here. That's not an option. What we have, the choice we have, is not to create suffering out of it, out of being born into a human realm. So that's the second noble truth. We create suffering out of craving, wanting it to be otherwise. Or when we've got something that we like, holding on to it, isn't craving for it not to cease, not to end. So you might have a pleasant experience in meditation, but if you attach to that, then you'll create suffering out of it because it won't last. The amazing thing is that the third noble truth is available all the time, that the realization comes of freedom, is a laying down of the burden, so that when we let go of the grasping mind, then that's laying down a burden. And then we experience freedom. Well, if you're carrying something heavy, what it feels like when you put it down. It's a sense of release, isn't it? And it's just the same. If you carrying something heavy, let's say, an attachment to, we want somebody to be a particular way, that if they could just be a different person, then I wouldn't have any problems with them. If they could only change, I'd be fine with them. But because they're the way they are, I can't bear it. It's really irritating, really annoying, it's really upsetting. Well, if we just accept the way that person is, then we lay down the burden of wanting them to be otherwise. And there's a sense of freedom in that really is. So that's saying the same if we lay down the burden of how we want to be. I shouldn't be this way. I shouldn't be like this. I should be able, if I were to think, I should be able to speak more eloquently. Maybe I could listen to somebody else and think, oh, they're such they can convey things so eloquently. So it just seems to flow from them. I don't know how they do that. That's incredible. And if I were to think that way, then I recognize, if I were to then recognize, oh, why would I compare myself with someone else? What's that about? Where's that coming from? That sense of not feeling good enough, not that they're better than me. If I lay that down, that's laying down a burden, isn't it? And then there's a freedom that comes from that, a freedom to be as I am. Don't have to be how somebody else is. because I've seen them and think they're impressive. You know, I can let that go and let them and be as I am, be myself. Then there's a freedom there, and that is what the Buddha's pointing to in the third noble truth. So every time we let go, every time we let go, we can taste that freedom. Now that sounds kind of, no, that sounds a bit beyond belief, because you think, well, no, come on, I just let go of my attachment to I just let go of my attachment to those flowers are dying, and I just wanted to take them away. And my wife said, no, they're fine, just leave them as they are. So I wanted to get rid of them, and I said, oh, I just let that go. And okay, yes, that's true. There are 2 or 3 flowers that are alive. Let's leave them. What's the problem? And I let that go. Now you wouldn't think that was a big deal, and that you would, oh, come on, that's not nibbana, is it? Well, no, it's not. But we overlook the sense of release when we experience, when we let go. We don't notice it, or we don't tune into it, or we don't nurture the taste or the flavor of that sufficiently. So it passes us by. When we let go of the argument, we decide not to bother. We just let it be, and we experience that release. That's something that we can nurture. And oh yeah, that's something of value. That is a taste of freedom. That's a sense of direction that I can go in. That's something to value, and something to incline towards. And that's incredibly helpful in practice, because when we feel that can be of something of real value, then we can have a real benefit. We can really feel the benefit of inclining towards it. Then it really is an impetus to let go more, to let go again, to do it again. And so because the human condition is such that we respond positively to pleasant states and negatively to unpleasant states. And when we can cultivate a joy in relinquishment, there's a big impetus in that. There's a real, it's easy. We're making life easy. We're making the practice come alive in a very genuine and simple, but positive and helpful way, because we're making it easy for us, because we respond to that positive feedback. We get a positive feedback loop that comes from really noticing the joy or the freedom that comes from letting go. And that's an encouragement to follow that path, to do it again and again. I think somebody from this group, a few weeks ago, I'd said that if you let go of anger, then there's an incredible freedom in that, incredible release. And then the next week they came with in chat, they put something and said, I tried that out and it really worked. And I just said, well, that's really good. Do it again. If you do it once, then it has an enormous benefit. But if you do it again, it has then make it into a habit. You can imagine the benefit that comes from that. I think it would be good if people would like to ask some questions. I quite like to see questions in chat because I don't know, I think sometimes people find it easier to type a little question in chat, and I'm be very happy to receive one, but also very happy if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question. Don't hold back if you're quite new, because that, you know, whatever question we have is quite often we can think it's only for me, but it's actually for everyone. Very often people have that same question but didn't think of how to ask it. They couldn't put it into words. And it might be I feel very restless. What do I do about that? Or what do you do about sleepiness? Or what do you do about doubt? I mean, these are all wonderful things to practice with. But when we experience them, we can see them as a problem, you know, or something that gets in the way, because perhaps we don't know how to turn them into learning opportunities. You know, that sounds terribly educational, but you know, that's the way to practice, isn't it? You know, the amazing thing is the things that come up in the mind are the things we need to learn from. So don't dismiss anything and think, oh, sorry, oh, that's so embarrassing, or I shouldn't pay attention to that, or that I shouldn't feel that way, because if it comes up, then it's something to investigate. And then if it may be that you don't have the tools to investigate it with, so by all means ask a question and I might be able to help. I've got a question here. When I hear suffering, I think of being very ill, etc. Could suffering be considered as anxiety, tension, etc.? Yes, it definitely is. A good translation of, you know, the suffering is just a translation of this word dukkha, and a good translation of dukkha is anxiety or tension. So it's not about, we mean when the use of the word suffering, there's nothing wrong with using the word. When we translate Pali into English, then you find that you have to redefine the English word that you've used. It's very strange, you know. It's a little bit, you know, you say, oh, dukkha, suffering, and then you have to redefine suffering. Say, oh, the sort of suffering I'm talking about is this. It's that sense of unsatisfactoriness. It's not being right. It shouldn't be this way. Or it might be stress or tension, that kind of suffering. It's the suffering of resistance, the suffering of grasping and losing, not having what we want. The suffering of disturbance, even subtle suffering of just the mind that's so going yap, yap, yap the whole time. There's a lot of suffering involved in that. You don't really notice that the mind's doing that until you start to meditate, and then you hear this mind going yap, yap, yap. That's quite, you know, that's a kind of suffering. To notice, you know, it's unsatisfactory, isn't it? To think, well, my mind shouldn't be like that. So we feel that as soon as we feel that, then there's suffering there. But on the other hand, it's the natural thing of the mind to do. The mind, just like that, the mind brings thought. That's what the mind does. It deals in thoughts. It's its the currency of the mind. You can't blame the mind for coming up with content. That's what it does. And it's the same. It'd be like blaming the eyes for seeing visual objects, or blaming the ears for hearing sound. I've got a question. Oops, I missed a question there that came, and somebody else asked another one, but let's go back to this question. Could you talk about letting go? I know this is desirable and also helpful, but I struggle to practice this. Question mark. I'm not quite sure what the significance of the question mark is, but you're not the only one that struggles to practice with letting go, because it's a habit, isn't it? Grasping is a very deep-rooted habit. We think that if we can, if we want to be happy, then we need to grasp something that will make us happy. If we think we want to avoid suffering, we'll get rid of the things that we don't like, that we don't want. So this is fundamental animal instinct. We're not talking anything complicated here. If you find an amoeba, then you'll see that it moves towards food, and it recoils away from things that are unpleasant. Even the kind of simplest level of life seeks out the desirable and recoils from the undesirable. You watch what happens to a worm when you poke it. It doesn't like it. So I'm not encouraging you to go and poke worms. I'm sorry, but I was just on the allotment earlier on, and noticed that when you that worms don't like being dug out of the ground. But so yes, it's not, the letting go it can be a struggle because it goes against the stream. We can say that it goes against the habit. In fact, it seems to go against logic, because we think that if we could grasp something that would make us happy, it would make us happy. And it seems logical. And you'd think if we could get rid of the things that make us unhappy, then we would be happy forever. But of course we're not, because as soon as we get what we want, we've got the conditions to be dissatisfied with it. It's an interesting thing that the kind of peak moment of bliss, if you like, or happiness that comes out of getting what we want is just before we get it, when we know we're going to get it, but we haven't got it yet. So the thing, you know it's coming, it's certain now. You're going to receive it, but you haven't got it yet. Because as soon as you get it, you start to find fault with it. You start to find the flaw in it. You didn't know, you thought that the new car, for example, was going to be whatever it was going to be. Presumably, you didn't know the drawback of this thing, but as soon as you've got it, now you start to hear the rattle. You think, oh no, it shouldn't have a rattle like that. I thought this car was going to make me happy, and now it's creating suffering because it's got a rattle. I'm going to have to go back to the garage and ask them to find out where this rattle's coming from. It's driving me mad. So as soon as we got it, we start to create suffering. But before we got it, we weren't, that was, we were perfectly happy. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. So letting go goes against the stream, but that's why I'm suggesting, that's why I'm encouraging you to to nurture the freedom that comes from that, because that's an impetus, that's that sense, that bliss of laying down the burden, because that will encourage us. That's the feedback, the positive feedback loop we need to resist the pull of the grasping mind. Because logic, you can't defeat that with logic. You can't, logically, we can see that we were going to create suffering out of this car as soon as we got it. We know that because we've done it before, but it doesn't stop us buying another one. Logic doesn't defeat it, but letting go does. That's relinquishment is the only way. Which doesn't mean to say that we can't ever get another car, buy a car, but when we letting go, this freedom, this relinquishment leads to wisdom ultimately, because we know we begin to see things as they really are, so that we don't expect them to make us happy. We don't, like one of the things Ajahn Chah would say, it's like this glass. He would hold up a glass and say, this glass is already broken. Well, it's not actually broken yet, but it will be broken. So we can when we live, when in the way of seeing things as they're already broken, and we don't expect them to be otherwise. So when they break, it's just following its own nature. If we live in this body knowing it's already, in a sense, that it's already broken, then when it breaks, it's not a surprise. It's impermanent. It can't be otherwise. Sooner or later, it's going to break. It's going to disintegrate. And so there's a freedom in that, in opening up to that way of seeing. Let it be broken. And then we let go. This is extremely helpful for me this evening. I frequently compare myself to others. I know what you mean. Often at my own detriment, and criticize myself for not doing something a certain way, or not understanding something as quickly as another person has. This is a constant issue. It's caused me suffering. How would you recommend that I remove this burden and start to accept the way I am from the skills that I do have? One thing that's I like to use the terminology that Ajahn Chah uses. He talks about the inner tyrant. So one of the things you're saying here, there's being critical, comparing yourself with others at your own detriment, and criticize yourself for not doing something a certain way, or for not understanding something as quickly as somebody else has. That's a sort of the inner critic, isn't it? And that Ajahn Chah called it the inner tyrant. And he's written a really nice little booklet about that. You might be able to pick up, if you go to the Amaravati website, you might find that you can, I don't know if that might be downloadable. Quite a few of his booklets are downloadable. Yeah, this is a really powerful thing to investigate. Very transformative. If you can listen, develop, cultivate that inner listening, and not to believe in this voice, a self-critical mind, then you can find a way just to let this be, so that you hear this inner voice, this self-critical mind, and And you can say, are you sure? So I use the mantra, are you sure? So if you hear this inner voice saying, well, what was it? Comparing yourself to others. Yeah. So if you hear this inner voice saying, oh, they're better than I am. Or you could say, are you sure? Well, you're not really sure. I mean, it's a really interesting thing when you go on a meditation retreat, for example. You can look around the meditation room and you can see 50 people maybe sitting there meditating. And you can imagine that they're all better than you. It's not that difficult to do. You can look at them and think, oh gosh, look at that person. They're so straight, so upright. And look at them, they never move. That's incredible. Or you can look around the room, you can always find somebody, if you want to, you could always find somebody that's better than you. And you can say, are you sure? Well, of course you're not sure. You've no idea what's going on in their head. You've no idea. You don't know. For all you know, they're looking at you and feeling just the same. And your mind's all over the place. So you think, gosh, it's just, you're just making it up. So whatever it is that's in the mind, it's something you've made up. This inner dialogue, this inner voice, is a story you're telling yourself. And it goes back to conditioning, doesn't it? So if you're telling yourself you're not good enough, it's because you've heard that before somewhere. Where do you hear that voice? Where does that voice come from? Because it's like a little parrot on your shoulder. It's just saying, you're not good enough. You could try harder. You should do better. And where have I heard that before? So when you listen to that, kind of, where's that come from? Oh yeah, I remember seeing that on my school report. Yeah, could try harder. Should do better. And it's just a little mantra that I picked up in my life. Now, and kind of just telling myself, been telling myself so long, I've forgotten, never really challenged it. So when you investigate that using this little mantra, like, are you sure? Then, no, I think it's just I'm just telling it. It's just a little voice. It's just a habit to tell myself that. I'm just making it up. That just comes from my conditioning. I've heard that so often when I was young. I just picked that up. And now I keep telling myself and torturing myself with it and believing in it. Of course, it's not true. So that's a really helpful thing to do, to let go of the inner tyrant. And one of the things it's important is not to be critical of being critical, because before we know what's happened, we think, I shouldn't be critical. So you just keep on letting go. Don't believe in any of it. Thank you for your reflections. Earlier you spoke about knowing or recognizing feelings and states of mind. How do we decide what we would benefit from exploring and investigating further? Is this a sense that develops further with practice? How do we pick up on slightly more subtle feelings, which we might need to investigate and avoid overlooking them? I think with meditation practice, we let go of the surface chatter of the mind, and it's quite natural for things to come up that come from deeper. So as we calm the mind down, then more subtle feelings that we might need to investigate will come up. And we become more sensitive and aware. And so that things will come up which we didn't notice before, hadn't noticed. When I say hadn't noticed, I mean that because they're so habitual, we didn't really notice them. The habitual, that could be an example how we can just habitually hold on to a kind of sense of tension, which we never really noticed. That might be manifest in the body, some furrowed brow, for example. The furrowed brow, you don't really know why your brow's furrowed, but sure enough, some reason or another it is. And when we start to calm down and relax, we start to notice where that tension's coming from. It's a physical representation of something, of the mind being perhaps trying too hard. And we hadn't noticed it. So we realized, oh, I can let that go, something to let go. But there's also more to it than that, because we might notice a lack of inner compassion, for example. This self-critical mind is a very unkind attitude, isn't it? And we wouldn't be as critical of anyone else as we can be towards ourselves. So that lack of inner kindness, it may be something we hadn't noticed, but it can be felt as a subtle feeling, that lack of kindness. And it repays investigation. So by investigation, we can investigate with forgiveness. So one thing I said about knowing, sometimes it's helpful to know tools that we can use. So if we notice that sense of unkindness, that is possible to forgive. So we can cultivate forgiveness. It's a practice, something that we can develop. There's a way of doing that. I deliberately have done that. Taking loving kindness, developing loving kindness, and taking it into that kind of compassion, and then forgiveness, which is incredibly powerful and can be very beneficial. At least I did. I found it very beneficial. It's a kind of inner self-therapy. It's incredibly powerful. It really works. So I can recommend it, but I don't really know how to recommend it, because I just found it very useful and I did it. I don't particularly teach it because I think it goes very deep. I think you need to be ready. You couldn't really do it on a Zoom evening, because I don't feel, I couldn't pick up the fallout, because it can be really, it's very powerful, and I'm not there for you. So I don't want to leave people feeling that there's a lot of half-finished business, in a sense. But you can definitely cultivate that attitude of forgiveness, and the secret is to take this path slowly, and so little by little. So, when I did this, I found that I was really amazed how I carried blame, a sense of blame and failure and responsibility of everything. And I thought, that's really arrogant, because if every relationship that broke up was my fault, it doesn't give the other person any responsibility, any sense of responsibility. I remembered that I really did. I know it was ridiculous, but I really did blame myself for every relationship that failed in my life. And I thought, that's ridiculous. When I actually saw that, I realized how arrogant it was to feel that way. It didn't give anyone else the opportunity to be responsible or to choose to break a relationship. And that was really helpful to see that, and that self-forgiveness. I realized it was a letting go of this. I was clinging to something, a self. It was a kind of self that put me in the center of the world. It said, there's only me here. Nobody else matters. And that's when I gave myself for that, sort of being realized that I wasn't responsible for everything bad that happened, then it wasn't difficult to forgive other people for any part they may have played in it. So I feel like we've got to the end of the time we have. There's one question which I really don't have time to answer. So I feel like it's not fair to read it out. I think it would be good to remember that question. The person who's asked it, maybe ask it next time. So I think it's time to take a look at the closing homage. I hope people found it useful and they can find something of benefit, and that they'll. And I often say that you only need to know one thing. So although you might think, oh, somebody said all these things and I ought to do this and this, but actually you only need to know one thing, because wherever we are, we only need one thing to step in the right direction. It only takes one thing. So if you just take one thing away that's of value, of benefit, then that can take you forward and in the right direction. Then it's a being of value. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. The teaching so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha. Thank you everyone for coming tonight, and I hope to see you again. I'll be leading it in a fortnight and Nick's leading it next week. So hope to see you again.